what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about the rise of Christian nationalism. We're going to talk about how it came about and how it came to America specifically. Then we're going to talk about the Millerite movement and how the Seventh-day Adventist Church was born into existence. And we're going to start tracing the growth of Christian nationalism as Adventism literally grows alongside it. The first major Christian nationalist movement was organized basically at the exact same time as the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And so we're going to chart that and through the National Reform Association. And I'm going to illustrate how Adventists have opposed Christian nationalism through political cartoons that Adventists created and published. And so I think that'll be a fun way. There are myriads of ways we could discuss this because our literature was filled with this kind of material. Now, a foundational text for the history is Joseph S. Moore's Founding Sins. And this is a particularly significant book because it's charting the history, by and large, of the National Reform Association. And the National Reform Association it does still exist, although it's eclipsed by other Christian nationalist organizations today. But the National Reform Association was the Adventist #1 enemy throughout the 19th century and even into the 20th. And so up until I'd say for almost a century, and so anyhow, this is a particularly significant book because it is relevant to Seventh-day Adventism, even though Seventh-day Adventists do not appear in Moore's book. So what is Christian nationalism? If you still don't know, in general, it's a movement that is seeking dominance in social, cultural, and political life. It's very much on the minds of so many Americans right now and people around the world because of the killing of Charlie Kirk not too long ago. And so this is very much on people's minds. Charlie Kirk was an avowed, very open Christian nationalist. And so this is something that people are, if they had still not known, maybe they're getting some sort of dose of it now. Well, American Christian nationalism is rooted in Scottish Presbyterianism. And so the historian Joseph S. Moore, he's traced this ideology to the Covenanters. This is a religious group that took their name from the 1638 Scottish political alliance that opposed to King Charles I, right? And so this coalition was united by the Scottish National Covenant. And this covenant is declaring that Scotland is a Christian nation. And by Christian, they really mean Presbyterian. Other kinds of Christians were certainly not included in their understanding when they wrote this Scottish National Covenant. Okay, and so when Charles II was restored to the throne in 1660, so there's been a little bit of time, a couple of decades of time here, the Covenanters all of a sudden became outlaws, and then they will violently oppose the so-called ungodly crown. So the Covenanters and Christian nationalism in Scotland had sort of a heyday for about 22 years, if I've done my math correctly. But when Charles II comes onto the throne, they become outlaws, and they are violent opposers of Charles II. And what you see from the rise of Christian nationalism is that Christian nationalists have no problem with violence. They have very violent rhetoric, and that rhetoric sometimes becomes actualized violence as well. Okay, and so the Covenanters, they believe that their nation was in a perilous condition as long as they, as a nation, are violating their national covenant with God. Okay, so that's some sort of thing there. The Covenanters, of course, are going to argue for two Christian kingdoms. This is something that is not too uncommon. There's the secular kingdom with the power of the sword, and then there's the spiritual kingdom with the power of the keys to heaven. But Joseph Moore has correctly pointed out that though different, these two kinds of power have both one authority, one ground, one final cause, and they tend to one end. And so really there's not a huge distinction between them because they just come right together, and they're meant to come together. So both church and state were empowered by the same divine source and therefore enforced one eternal truth. But each kingdom, so-called kingdom, was supposed to use their power in different ways to enforce God's authority. Okay. Nevertheless, they had the same goal, and so it is an ostensibly divided church and state, but in actuality, a very much united church and state. Okay. And so the Covenanters, they will move to America. They will start to immigrate to America in the 17th century. The first are going to arrive in 1651. They're going to settle primarily in Massachusetts and Maine. Another wave of Covenanters will come to America in 1684 and 85. Some of them are indentured servants, and they will settle in New Jersey. And then there's another Covenanter colony that's going to be started in the Carolina backcountry. Right? After 1700, Covenanters are going to tend to settle in Pennsylvania, and some are going to scatter around New York and the Carolina backcountries, okay? And soon after, the Covenanters are soon going to declare independence from American Presbyterianism. So do not think of these Presbyterians, the Covenanters, as being like the more broad-based Covenanter, or excuse me, Presbyterian denomination. At this time, they're distinct. The Covenanters, they literally will become independent from the American Presbyterians, and they don't all get along. So the Presbyterian Church in America is not Christian nationalist at this time, but the Covenanters, they are going to champion this, and they are going to be the ones that make it spread and become popular. After the Revolutionary War, the Covenanters are going to cast George Washington as a godless oppressor, okay? And their criticisms worsened when the U.S. Constitution was ratified. Now, of course, today, Christian nationalists, they applaud and uphold people like Washington as a hero. You've got people who try to make all of these people like George Washington or Thomas Jefferson, they try to make them look like evangelical Christians. People like David Burton, who are their histories are just laughable. That's how horrible they are. Even conservatives, very conservative historians have pointed out that there are so many issues and just invented things by David Burton and people like him. So things have changed, but when it began, when Christian nationalists were living through the Revolutionary period, they didn't like George Washington, and they did not like the U.S. Constitution. And the primary reason they don't like the Constitution is because God is not mentioned at all. And so many are going to be surprised because all state constitutions had acknowledged God in some way. And in some manner, the Articles of Confederation had honored at least the quote, God, great governor of the world. But when the U.S. Constitution came out, the only mention of religion was to disqualify it as a test for office. And so they're like, this is horrible. The Covenanters abhor the Constitution. And so Dr. Moore says, thus the loudest and most forceful calls for a Christian America in 1788 and 1789 were made against the Constitution, not in favor of it. And I would suggest that even though the rhetoric has changed today, that people are claiming support for the Constitution that are Christian nationalists, they are not actually supporting the Constitution as the founding fathers had intended it. So the Covenanters, they're emphatically advocating for a national religion. American leaders were atheists from their perspective, and the Sabbath, and they mean Sunday in this case, was desecrated on a weekly basis, and they're upset because slavery was legal. Okay, the Covenanters actually were generally opposed to slavery. Now, the national authority of we the people, they viewed as a flawed basis for government because it denied Christ his rightful place above the state. Okay? The U.S. Constitution was, quote, a manifest dethroning of the Lord and his anointed from the government. And so national laws from the Covenanters' perspective should be based upon the laws of God found in the Protestant Bible. Okay? And they do not like religious liberty. They're just very openly opposed to it in these early years. And they view it as a repugnant cesspool that germinates heresy. Again, the rhetoric on this has changed where Christian nationalists are claiming religious liberty, but they define it in ways that only privilege and benefit themselves and not other people opposed to their ideologies or just simply different from them. Okay, somebody I want to highlight here is Alexander MacLeod. Maybe it's pronounced MacLeod. I'm not sure, but anyways, I'm going to call him Alexander MacLeod. He's a prominent Covenanter minister, and he publishes a pamphlet in 1804 titled Messiah, Governor of the Nations of the Earth. And he's interesting for our discussion today because we want to talk about millennialism apocalypticism and things that Adventists care about, which Christian nationalists care a lot about as well, both in the past and in the present. And so MacLeod, he argues that there is that the millennium is basically present now. He argues for a millennial present, unlike the Adventists, for example, who say that it's coming very soon. So MacLeod is arguing that the millennium is literally upon us. We're living sort of in it now. It's basically right upon us, right here. And so God's judgments, therefore, become, for MacLeod, present realities. Jesus must be immediately acknowledged as a result of these things, as the ruler of the nation. If, in other words, if Covenanters are arguing that if Jesus is not immediately at this very moment acknowledged as the ruler of nations, then America will be destroyed. So this has to happen. And again, he views religious liberty and toleration as seductive tools of the devil. Okay, so this is his perspective of the millennium. And Adventists are going to come on the scene. The second Advent movement starts to rise up not too long after MacLeod is preaching his sermon. The Covenanters are still they're very much doing their thing. And I want to introduce to you, in case you don't know him, hopefully you do, to Charles Fitch. Charles Fitch was one of the most influential Millerite ministers, and I think probably the most eloquent of all Millerite ministers, at least based upon the information that has survived and come down to us. He was a golden-tongued orator, so much so that every single person who heard him, almost to a man or woman, would say that he was an extremely eloquent speaker, including his detractors. So people that did not agree with Fitch and did not like him, they would still walk away and say, "But man, he was eloquent," and talk about how well crafted his sermons and speeches were. Charles Fitch is the one who dies a few days before the Great Disappointment. Perhaps you've heard this story of him baptizing several groups of people in Lake Erie in October, or it might have even been late September, if I'm remembering correctly. And as a result of that, he gets sick and he dies just a few days before the Great Disappointment. He's also mentioned in one of Ellen White's first visions. She sort of sees proleptically that Charles Fitch will be in heaven. And so he had a big influence on Ellen White's life, and was very influential on Seventh-day Adventists, even though he dies before the Seventh-day Sabbath becomes sort of a thing. Well, in early July 1843, Fitch preaches a sermon that he calls "Come Out of Her, My People." And he first preached it in Rochester, New York, which was a major hub of the Millerite movement. It was arguably the most influential Millerite sermon throughout the entire movement. And though Fitch himself was not the first to promote come-outerism, this sermon sparked the largest wave of come-outerism in the entire anti-slavery movement. Okay, and I'm going to circle back to that in a moment. But what I'm wanting you to understand is that Fitch is not just influential for Seventh-day Adventist history. He was hugely influential in abolitionist history, and therefore a major influencing figure in American history. Okay. So like other come-outers, Fitch is going to argue that majoritarian religious and political structures are oppressing racial and religious minorities. And they are also, those structures, the church and state, are suppressing advancements toward liberation. So in order to understand really what's going on for Fitch, you need to understand that like MacLeod, even though they will articulate it differently. MacLeod is arguing that Christ is there to reign spiritually. And almost every American if they think that the millennium is coming soon or in the future, they believe that Christ is going to be spiritually reigning, not physically present during the millennium. And Fitch is going to intervene into this conversation and say it is absolutely foundational to injustice if Christ is not here in the flesh to reign himself. And I want you to follow along with his argument here, and I'm going to help you unpack it because it's really powerful and extremely relevant, I think, to Adventists today. Nothing has changed here. This is how Charles Fitch, this is the foundation for social justice from Fitch's perspective, right? So he's tailoring this to an Adventist audience, and he's arguing that whoever is opposed to the personal, that is physical reign of Jesus Christ over the world on David's throne, he actually boldly says, you are Antichrist. In the all caps, that's Fitch. Okay. He says that if you reject that, you are Antichrist. He could not have said it more strongly. Okay. So this is critical. Now let's unpack why is he making that claim. According to Fitch, the Catholics, he said, had become Antichrist because the popes rule the world as God's vice regent on earth, and they demoted Christ's reign to a spiritual one. So they're ruling for Christ instead of letting Christ rule himself. Okay, that's his rationale. He says, similarly, all the Protestant churches are Antichrist because they likewise are seeking worldwide dominance through conversion during their so-called temporal millennium. He explains further, he says, each of these Protestant sects is willing to rule the world as the papists have done for Christ, but no one of them is willing to have Christ come in person to rule the world for himself. And so in this manner, Fitch is forcefully asserting that humans are usurping the authority of Christ by regulating his rule to a spiritual, non-corporeal reign. I hope this is tracking. He is saying that if Christ is supposedly reigning spiritually, that means some human being is actually in power. And if a human being is actually in power, then that means injustice will prevail because of sin and the nature of sin, etc., and the inherence in human leaders to be unjust. And so that is Fitch's claim. He says here, he's observing that both Catholics and Protestants had hoped to be the predominating sect during their so-called fabled millennium. And if one religion were to rule the world, Fitch is sort of joking here. He says it might as well be the Catholics, because if any of the Protestant sects gained worldwide dominance, they would become, quote, as corrupt and as cruel and tyrannical as the Catholics were. And he gives examples for this as to why and how people in America can look at the evangelical churches and say they are Babylon. Okay? He's living in a time when everyone seems to know virtually everyone seems to know just automatically that the Catholics are Babylon. They're so it's Protestants are very much dominating America at this time. Catholics are still a minority. So everyone just knows automatically that the Catholics are Babylon. But almost everyone views the Protestants as the good guys. And Fitch is saying absolutely not. Absolutely not. And we know the Protestants are part of Babylon, he says, because they lust for power. They lust for gold. They want to have great houses, big houses, sumptuous dwellings and apparel. They want to have great clothes. They're looking for personal aggrandizement. And there are other things like this. But there was one thing that demonstrated their imperial control above everything, and that was slavery. Fitch argues that this is the clearest proof of Protestant tyranny. He says it this way. He says the spirit of oppression reigns in greater or less portions of the leading Protestant or evangelical sects unrebuked, and a man may sell or buy his fellow man and then sit at the communion table or even minister at the altar of God, and by the mass of Protestant Christendom go unreproved. And so, since slavery and oppression would remain if humans reigned in Christ's stead, to truly come out of Babylon required abolitionists to convert to, quote, the true scripture doctrine of the personal coming and kingdom of Christ. That is why he says to reject the personal reign of Christ is to be in league or to be Antichrist, because that means that humans are going to be ruling in the name of Christ, and they'll be doing all manner of evil, not just doing evil, but doing it in the name of Christ, which is actually Antichrist. And so the only effective antidote to corruption, cruelty, and tyranny innate in human authorities is Jesus coming in person to rule for himself. Okay? Now, I want to help you understand how these ideas are going to develop into the Seventh-day Adventist Church's doctrine of America and prophecy, which they always called it in these early years the two-horned beast. People today often call it the lamb-like beast, right? From Revelation 13. Well, by 1845, there are about 100,000 abolitionists, as best as that we can tell, who had come out of so-called Babylon. They had separated from the evangelical majority churches primarily. The Adventist movement, the Millerite movement, they comprised about half of that entire number. The Millerite Adventist movement was the single largest religious group to come out of all of these churches. Adventists made that entire anti-slavery come-outer movement a driving dominant force, which was very possibly, very likely, the largest mass protest exodus from evangelicalism in history. Okay? Well, in 1844, the American Anti-Slavery Society is going to officially endorse come-outerism. And a banner is going to be presented to William Lloyd Garrison, who is basically the de facto leader of that society. They're going to be delivering that banner to him to commemorate the significance of that event. Now, unfortunately, we do not have that banner, to my knowledge. It has not survived, but we have a great description, and I want to highlight some aspects of it for you so that you can picture it in your mind, right? So the principal object on this banner is an American eagle, obviously representing the United States. But this eagle is trampling upon prostrate humanity with one foot on the Constitution and the right of petition, which is also used to keep down a slave who was chained there. They have a slave chained to the earth by the neck and an ankle with a pillow, his head on a pillow of thorns, right? And so you've got this eagle that is literally representing America, but trampling upon the Constitution. But the eagle's wings are outspread in a protecting manner, okay? And one of them is over the U.S. Capitol building, representing the state, and the other is over a stereotypical American church, representing the church writ large. But in front of that church, you see a slave or slaves being whipped and branded right in front of the church, right? And so the purpose of this imagery is to illustrate how America, through the power of both church and state, protected and promoted slavery and all other manners of injustice. And so it was, even though Christian nationalism did not have a name, it did not go by that name, it is very much opposed to that notion of a united church and state. Well, 6 years later, the Seventh-day Adventists will introduce a new image to illustrate this exact same point. They will develop their doctrine of American prophecy on the basis of Revelation 13, as literally in lockstep as the Fugitive Slave Law of 1850 is being created and then passed into law. Okay, in 1858, Uriah Smith will engrave the following to illustrate this core Adventist belief, which was, you could call it a fundamental belief, because they had this beast on their prophecy charts and they talked about it everywhere they were spreading the Adventist message. So this is this two-horned beast, okay? And you see it rising up out of the earth. It looks like a leopard, lion, and bear combination. The reason they draw it that way, if you remember from Revelation 13, that's how the beast that comes out of the sea is described, right? Which the Adventists attached and connected with the Catholic Church. But the Adventists at this time are drawing it this way because they wanted it to be fearsome looking, but they also wanted to make the connection that it is basically an image of duplication of the Catholic Church. And so that's how they view it. And to connect things very clearly for people, this is drawn by Uriah Smith. You see his initials after the back leg. You can see a US there in the shadow of the back leg. There's a banner that reads slavery and one that reads creeds. Notice it does not say blue laws, okay? Creeds was the main way, or one of the main way, probably the main way at this time, the Adventists were speaking against what we would now call, oppression or whatever to religious minorities. But I want you to notice some of the other things going on here. There are telegraph lines going around the sea, okay? That's what's going on. There's telegraph lines going around the sea, and then you see the train in the background, right? Then there's also lightning coming down from heaven. But I want you to see that, and I want you to contrast that with this image. And I've shown that I've been doing this contrast in presentations for years now. This is another image that is drawn by and representative of the American majority's perspective of America and what it's doing. This is painted by John Gast in the 1870s, and it's titled American Progress. And what you have is everything headed westward. This is all about westward expansion and talking about American greatness and about white people literally conquering the land in the name of America as a nation and for God, right? And what you have here is you have the telegraph lines and the trains. There's also stagecoaches or wagons, stagecoaches and wagons. You've got people on horseback. You've got the plow going on. But notice what's happening. All the so-called wild things are fleeing from the white man. Okay, you've got native peoples that are fleeing. You've got wild animals like bears and presumably leopard some kind of leopards, it appears, or something, and they are fleeing from the white man. And this is supposed to represent what people are calling manifest destiny, God's will for America as a nation to literally conquer from continent to continent in the name of white Christianity, right? And so this is celebrated and praised in America at this time. But notice that the objects that are used here as signs of progress, the telegraph line and the train cars, the Seventh-day Adventists had used those exact same images or symbols as signs of oppression. They recognized that American progress was oppressive. And this is a very, very almost entirely unheard of kind of perspective. So to illustrate this, I showed this to one of my professors at Florida State University, and he was very shocked by the image because he had never seen anything like that. He's never seen, and he's an expert in the entire field, right? And so he had never seen anything like this where some Christians somewhere were using these technologies as signs of oppression, which historians, by the way, have borne out in their work. But the Adventists were living through that time, and they saw it in live fashion, right? Well, this image by John Gass, by the way, if you have not paid attention, this has made the news recently because just a few months ago, on July 23 of this year, the Department of Homeland Security and the White House, they reposted this image with the tagline, "A heritage to be proud of, a homeland worth defending." So upholding white supremacy as something that Americans should be, yeah, proud of. And then, of course, you've got one person here. Is this painting literally of white Americans chasing Native Americans out of their land? And the answer to that question is yes, absolutely. That is exactly what it is. Okay. So this is significant. Now, let's come back with this in mind. Let's come back to the rise of Christian nationalism as the National Reform Association will form, as well as the Seventh-day Adventist Church. So according to the historian Joseph S. Moore, calls for a Christian America had fallen on deaf ears until the Civil War prompted seismic shifts in thinking about the nature of government. And so the Civil War actually Christianizes America, the federal government, in several ways. So, for example, between 1861 and 65, Congress calls for fast days. That is not entirely unique to the Civil War, but there's more than ever had been called. They employed numerous chaplains in the military. Again, there had been some in the Revolutionary War, but not to this degree and level. And they start placing "In God We Trust" on U.S. coinage for the first time. It won't enter paper money until the Eisenhower administration in the 1950s, but it will start to appear on American coins in the Civil War for the first time. So during this period and in the years following, Moore argues that, quote, American evangelicals and establishment Protestants began to see their government as a tool for asserting hegemony over American culture. For the first time, American Christianity seemed open to exploring new and more permeable boundaries between church and state. And we definitely see this happening. So the Covenanters had been the ones coming from Scotland who had been sort of championing this idea of Christian nationalism, but they are definitely a tiny, tiny minority. But during the Civil War, they will start to have some significant influence. They will renew their calls to acknowledge God in the U.S. Constitution when the war breaks out in 1861. There will be some resistance until the middle of the Civil War, but in early 1863, there's a convention for prayer and Christian conference, as it was called, that will be held in Hamilton, Ohio, and then again another one held in Xenia, Ohio. Okay, Covenanters will dominate these meetings, but there will be Methodists and Baptists that will attend. And then the convention will pass an amendment to place God, Jesus, and the Holy Scriptures in the U.S. Constitution. An initial reception to this convention was still cool, but on July 4, there's another meeting that's held in Pennsylvania, and there will be another one held in early 1864. And on this occasion, those present are going to organize what was called initially the National Association to Secure the Religious Amendment to the Constitution. 10 years later, that name will be shortened simply to the National Reform Association. And those present are going to claim that the war proved that the war and disruption and violence and so forth and conflict proved that the nation needed Christian moral qualities for its own survival. They claimed that God was judging the nation because it did not honor him explicitly in the Constitution and other documents of the founding of America. Okay, now the National Reform Association, they identify several problems with America. Here's a few. These are just a few. Number one, Catholic attempts to restrict Bible readings in the public school. They're very upset about that. They're upset about Sabbath, Sunday violations. They're upset with Mormon polygamy. They're upset with liquor sales, so they are very much temperance advocates. And the movement to abolish state and federally sponsored prayer, fast, and Thanksgiving days, that is very much something they believe is horrible. And they are opposed to the general attempts to divorce the government from Christianity. They call that political atheism. If the government is divorced from Christianity, they call that political atheism. Well, the National Reform Association, starting with the Civil War, is going to garner a very broad appeal. The National Reform Association claims that they are not seeking to combine church and state. Here's where the rhetoric that we start to have today comes into the existence. They say we're not seeking to combine church and state, but we're rather seeking to save Christian culture, the Christian culture of America. So much of their argument is based upon this idea that America was founded as a Christian nation, and therefore they are not trying to combine church and state, but merely save America and bring it back to its original purity, right? That's the rhetoric. It rings very similar to what we have today. Okay. And so they are going to organize the NRA, as I'm going to call them. This is not the Gun Association, although they will be happily in league with them later. The NRA is going to organize public meetings. They're going to send out newsletters. They're going to circulate petitions. This gives you some idea of how prominent they are. They have converts, including James Pollock. Pollock is the director of the U.S. Mint in Philadelphia. William Strong, he's an eminent jurist and soon to be named to the U.S. Supreme Court. Charles Sumner, B. Gratz Brown, and John Sherman, these are all U.S. senators. Numerous state governors, judges, professors, and church leaders from prominent denominations. And this includes people like Charles Grandison Finney, Jonathan Blanchard, and Dwight L. Moody. Those are big names, my friends. And so if you feel that America is being overwhelmed and there's a tremendous amount of power among Christian nationalists in the government today, it is stronger than it ever has been, but it has been strong before as well. In 1864, the General Conference of the Methodist Episcopal Church and the Old School Presbyterian General Assembly, they will support the God Amendment to the Constitution. The National Reform Association will then soar in popularity in the 1860s and 1870s. By 1876, it has more than 10,000 official members. Those are just official members, right? In 1869, Congress will receive some 18,500 signatures on hundreds of NRA petitions. And the next year, the signatures rose to 25,000. By the mid-1870s, more than 50,000 Americans signed NRA petitions. Now, that may not sound like a lot, but put this in comparison here. In 1870, Congress received only 2 petitions for an 8-hour workday. Okay? Only 2. 6 petitions for stricter naturalization policies, and only 700 signatures for women's suffrage on petitions. In 1874 and in 1875, only 8,000 people had signed temperance petitions. So Christian nationalism is outstripping all of these things by a significant clip. Okay? Joseph Moore is demonstrating that the Covenanters and the National Reform Association are going to permanently shape America, and they will seed the modern Christian nationalist movement. They are the ones who get us to where we are today. They will merge directly into the political conservatism of the 1940s. The National Association of Evangelicals is going to support the National Reform Association's agenda and seek amendment to the Constitution in 1947 and 54 with some serious vigor. They will also inspire the Christian Amendment movement, which emerged, another organization that emerges in 1945. And they are the direct forerunners to the Christian nationalist organizations such as Wall Builders, that's David Burton, the Heritage Foundation, that's the organization behind Project 2025, and many others, right? They are behind what would become Charlie Kirk's thing, right? The NRA itself, it still exists. But it has not been very active since 2009. There are other groups that have a lot more prominence but the ideology lives on and is very much in power throughout America today. Now, let's see how Adventists respond to the National Reform Association throughout our history here. It's very important. First of all, look at this National Liberty Association Declaration of Principles. This is a Seventh-day Adventist organization, and it still exists to this day. And it is very important for our church. It is a way that we work with non-Adventists as well. But look at that image. It's very similar to what that come outer banner that had been given to William Lloyd Garrison looked like. It's that eagle, that American eagle with outspread wings, one protecting the church and one protecting the state. But in this case, there's a caption here from U.S. President Grant that says, "Keep the state and the church forever separate." And so the eagle is not, its wings are not over those entities to protect them. The eagle is there actually to keep them separate. And that's a key distinction. But look at what they say. Look at what they declare. Look at what the Adventists declare here when we organize this in the late 19th century. They say, we believe in the religion taught by Jesus Christ. In other words, we're Christian, right? That's important. We believe in temperance, okay, and regard liquor traffic as a curse to society. So they are acknowledging that they have some similarities and some common ground with Christian nationalists, okay? They say we also believe in supporting the civil government and submitting to its authority, but this is going to be this is very much different in practice, right? But then they move on to denials. We deny the right of any civil government to legislate on religious questions. Now, pause right here. If you have this idea that Adventists in the past only opposed a national Sunday law, please disabuse yourself from that very wrong fiction. That is not true. Seventh-day Adventists used national Sunday laws as a driving force because they knew that Adventists could rally around that, and they're trying to move the entire denomination to oppose the package of Christian nationalism, okay? But they never limited their arguments to simply one little thing, right? And we have really abused our own understanding of the past by even making fun of them so much for simply having a supposed singular focus on a national Sunday law. That has definitely not ever been the case. Okay, so notice what they say. We deny the right of any civil government to legislate on religious questions, full stop. In other words, anything. No religious, union of church and state, none. Okay, then they continue. We believe it is the right and should be the privilege of every person, every man, they say in their 19th century parlance, to worship according to the dictates of his own conscience. And then they conclude with this. We also believe it to be our duty to use every lawful and honorable means to prevent religious legislation by the civil government. And we and our fellow citizens may enjoy the inestimable blessings of both religious and civil liberty. So today we spend more of our time focused on religious liberty. But when we started this out, Adventists were very much opposed to civil injustices as well as religious injustices because they recognize that they are very much connected and you need to combat both. And we really do to a large degree, and yet not as much as we probably should. Here's another fun thing that you may not know. The Seventh-day Adventist Church did not have an official series or set of fundamental beliefs. Depends on how you calculate this. Maybe you put the early 20th century, like 1930s, when the church manual, or the mid-20s when there's working policy. I think some of this might be included there. Or no, it's not in working policy. It's in some other official documents. I can't remember right now from the top of my head. Or you can go with 1980 when they're officially voted by the GC in session. Regardless of how you consider them official, there were many instances where Adventists wrote them down before. And this one is from 1897, if I'm not correct. Yeah, that's the right date here. And this is a fascinating one because if you did not know this, there used to be a time where Adventists were arguing that the Declaration of Independence should be appealed to in our fundamental beliefs. So look at here at number 14. Fundamental belief number 14 was that according to the Declaration of Independence, all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these rights is liberty for everyone to worship God according to the dictates of one's own conscience, without molestation from the government, unless the equal rights of others are encroached upon, that consequently all religious laws of our civil statute books are void, as being not only contrary to the Constitution of the United States in its First Amendment, but contrary to the higher constitution of the law of God. That's very fascinating. That's very fascinating to see religious liberty ensconced in our fundamental beliefs like that. But not only that, but an appeal to the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. So let's move on to these political cartoons that the Adventists produced and published. And they will help you see this this argument, this very pretty simple thesis that I'm laying out before you, that we have opposed Christian nationalism from the inception of our movement. So here you have America, the American Republic, depicted as this stone brick building, and the cornerstone of that building is the U.S. Constitution, which they have written out here. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. So they're talking about Article 1 of the First Amendment here. But then you have the Christian nationalists who are digging underneath that cornerstone, trying to remove it from America, the American nation. And you see the man here with the National Reform Association banner so that you know who he is. And his shovel, the bucket of that shovel says Sunday law legislation, but the arm of that shovel says political power. I don't know if you can read that. And then the other person with the pickaxe, it says intolerance. So again, Sunday law legislation is used as sort of a leading argument, but it is not meant to simply be about Sunday laws. Adventists are not just caring about themselves. They are fighting for the religious liberty of everyone. Here's a great image that shows us in greater clarity. Here we have the dark ages of religious persecution contrasted with modern enlightenment. And you have America represented as this woman. Her hat says United States at the top, and she's wearing the American flag, right? And then you have a theological politician, okay, a Christian nationalist who is trying to drag America back into the dark ages of religious persecution. So she is headed towards civil and religious liberty. That's the sign that's pointing that direction. But this Christian nationalist is trying to pull her back. And as you look in that Dark Ages period, you see the castle in the background that says prison. Then you see the Hall of Horrors, that building back there. Then there is the stake. There's the pillory. There are the stocks. There are blue laws with chains attached to that. And there's a sign pointing back that way, back that direction that reads intolerance, right? And so again, this is a way that Adventists are depicting their opposition to not just Sunday laws, but all of that entire package of Christian nationalism, Sunday laws being only a part of that package. Here's another one where Adventists are drawing America as a battleship. And there's a flag that reads American Ship of State. The flag at the front of that battleship reads separation of church and state. And the torpedo net on the side of that battleship reads the Constitution torpedo net. And look, I'm going to go from left to right. Look at all of the different subs that are launching missiles, torpedoes at quote unquote America. The first one is labeled American Sabbath League, and they're launching blue laws, right? Then there's the Federal Council of Churches launching a missile titled Enforced Sunday Rest. But move beyond that now. Look at what they also have here. The next one says Civil Righteousness Alliance, and they're launching a missile, a torpedo, that has got the message compulsory religious instruction in public schools. Adventists are opposed to this idea of making public schools religious, to have religious instruction that is compulsory in those spaces. Then the next sub is titled Christian Party, and they're launching a torpedo called Federal Religious Amendment. They want God, this idea that God's name being added to the Constitution. Adventists are opposing that. The next sub is Christian Citizenship League, launching a torpedo that's got compulsory religious legislation. Then you've got the National Reform Association launching their torpedo that's national compulsory religion. Then there's the Lord's Day Alliance launching their compulsory Sunday bills. And then there's the Federation of Catholic Societies that is launching their anti-free press bills. My friends, if you're not paying attention to how the press is being attacked, it is on prominent display if your eyes are open. We are seeing public figures, people like Jimmy Kimmel, being canceled simply because the president does not like to be criticized, right? And this is becoming an alarming issue. And if you're paying really close attention, you will find that the Trump allies are literally taking over the media. They now have CBS and CNN, as well as Fox and others that they had before. Okay, here's another image. This idea of history repeating itself, just like in the first or the New Testament period, the first century, where there are people trying to make Christ king by force. You have the exact same entities carrying banners with the same exact messages that we saw in the torpedoes. I won't read them all, but again, you've got the Blue Laws, Federal Religious Amendment, the Anti-Free Press Bill, compulsory religious instruction in public schools. All this stuff is being opposed by Adventists, right? And so there it is in a general form. Adventists were also opposed to specifically this idea of religious legislation. So take a look at this image here where Adventists are drawing this sort of entering wedge, the thin edge of the wedge as they title it here, that they're trying to break into Congress. And you've got a national reformer, a Christian nationalist here with a big sledgehammer with the words political pressure. And they're trying to drive this plank that says government enforcement of sectarian doctrines and religious amendment to Constitution into Congress. Please tell me, where's the Sunday law right there? It's not explicit because Adventists are opposing the general Christian nationalist platform. They're opposed to the whole thing. Here's another one where the state is depicted as a Roman carrying a sword, standing erect, and the church is depicted as a woman, but held up only by a crutch. She's crippled, and that crutch reads civil laws on it, right? And she's in league and having to rely on the state to have forward momentum. But this is titled an ill-sorted pair, right? Here's another one that I think is quite stark, because what you have here is you have Christianity, the Christian religion, depicted as the Ark of the Covenant, and Christian nationalists depicted as Uzzah, who touched the ark and was stricken dead by God himself, right? And so this Uzzah figure is a Christian nationalist. He's got church politician on his clothing, and his arm, it reads religious laws, and he is there touching the Christian ark. And as we know from scripture, the Adventists are implying that what is about to happen to this Christian nationalist, God himself is about to judge him and strike him dead. Here's another one where the church there is being approached and assaulted by someone, a Christian nationalist again, this united church and state. That's the torch seeking that's coming after this woman. And the torch itself, the stick says church and state union. The smoke and flame of that torch says pains and penalties for nonconformity to religious laws. We're living through this in America now. He's holding a banner, suggestions for Sunday laws and other religious legislation. And then there are other things going on. There are the sticks there. It says faggots for the stake. There's a snake coming out of those sticks with the word hate on it. Cruelty is attached to this haggard person's belt. Bigotry is attached to the handcuffs and chains around his neck. Persecution is there on the bottom of his ragged and torn clothing. And this is all really incredibly significant. And then they have a great quote from a historian, Macaulay, who said, the whole history of Christianity proves that she has indeed little to fear from persecution as a foe, but much to fear from persecution as an ally. In other words, Christians are not going to be persecuted because there's really not much need, or there's not much danger of that, at least in America. But if the unites with the state, then there is much reason to fear persecution if the church becomes the state's ally. It's I think, significant quote. Now, in addition to all of this, the Adventists are opposed not just to Christian nationalism, but I think it's important to know that they were opposing American imperialism overseas. And this goes hand in hand with Christian nationalism. We're going to take over Greenland. We're going to take over Panama, or the canal at least. We're going to take over Canada. Come on, so this kind of rhetoric goes hand in hand with Christian nationalism. And I want, again, to point you all, the historian Jeffrey Rosario, who teaches at Loma Linda, he has been working on a book, and it will be out within another year or two, that is showing how Adventists played a major role in American history in combating Christian nationalism as well as American imperialism. We'll just illustrate this briefly and then close out with a quote from Ellen White, and we'll be done. Okay, so here we have Satan tempting the Christian church to get into politics and rule the nations of the world, right? The governments of the world are put before her eyes to tempt, sort of like Jesus was tempted by Satan when he was on top of the mount after being in the desert, right? Okay, then you have other things. The American imperialism in the Philippines was a huge issue in the late 19th century, and Adventists were diametrically opposed. They were super opposed to this sort of nation, this idea of American imperialism. And here you have this idea of America trying to set itself up as a government and Adventists opposing it. So you have the Declaration of Independence seen in the U.S. government building in Manila, and you have the Liberty Bell. Okay, and you have the Constitution, but the Declaration has its clauses cut out about life, liberty, the rights of life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. That's crossed out. And then the Liberty Bell is muffled, and it says, the sign says, keep this bell muffled. In other words, don't let liberty ring, right? And so the caption reads this: American government in the Philippines without those constitutional safeguards of liberty which apply alike to individuals of every race and color, and without the Declaration of Independence which affirms the principle upon which these safeguards are set up, would be something vastly different from the American government as it has been understood for 100 years past in the United States. But if the Declaration of Independence should be taken there to the Philippines, that part of it would have to be cut out, which affirms that governments drive their just powers from the consent of the governed, since it is not proposed to govern the natives by their voluntary consent at all. In other words, Americans are just imposing themselves and their government upon the Philippines and the Filipinos. And the principles of government having been repudiated, the Constitution would be equally useless so far as concerns the security and rights of the governed. Such a government would be in no sense free government. So you can see clearly here what's going on. Here's another image. I won't read the caption on this one, but you have Satan here tempting America, liberty, where she's discouraged, despondent, depressed. She's set down the Declaration of Independence. She's set down the Constitution, and she's looking with tempted eyes to worldwide empire. And you can see the Philippines and Hawaii placed next to each other for the sake of rhetoric and argument here. And this is titled The New Temptation on the Mount. Okay, a very strong anti-imperialist image. And here's another one here where it's attacking this notion of empire in the Philippines, where you have all of these things supposedly being shipped to Manila. American rights is supposedly being shipped there. And then canned liberty for the Filipinos is being shipped there. And then arms to enforce our liberty in the Philippines, so taking all kinds of weapons. And then you have an American working man over on the side looking on, and he's hunched over because he's burdened down with war debt, Army and Navy bills, and the pension bill. And the point here that they're making, the Adventists are making, is that American imperialism is not only bad for the people that are being colonized, if you will, the Filipino people who are going to be oppressed and have the American government forced upon them, but it's also bad for the American people themselves, because the money that is going that is being used in this imperial project should be used to alleviate the war debt and all the other struggles that the working people in America are facing. And yet that's not what's happening. And so again, another strongly critical thing. Well, friends, I want to end with this quote from Ellen White, because what I want you to understand here is that opposing Christian nationalism is not simply a good idea. Ellen White makes it quite clear that it is foundational to our identity as Adventists, and that it is core to everything that we uphold as Christians. She says it this way: on December 11, 1888. She says other things like this, but I want you to see this quote because it's so clear. She says, the peculiar work of the third angel. That's a euphemism to describe Seventh-day Adventists, right? The peculiar work of the third angel. The Seventh-day Adventists are the ones proclaiming that third angel's message. She says, the peculiar work of the third angel has not been seen in its importance. God meant that his people should be far in advance of what they are today. But now, when the time has come for them to spring into action, they have the getting ready to do. Not all of our ministers who are giving the third angel's message really understand what constitutes that message. The national reform movement, okay, aka Christian nationalism, has been regarded by some as of so little importance that they have not thought it necessary to give much attention to it, and have even felt that in doing so, they would be giving time to questions distinct from the third angel's message. Ellen White says, may the Lord forgive our brethren for thus interpreting the very message for this time. The third angel's message comprehends more than many suppose. Specifically, and she's saying here, it includes opposing Christian nationalism. What interpretation do they give to the passage which says an angel descended from heaven with the earth, and the earth was lighted with his glory? This is not a time when we can be excused for inactivity. If this work, which was so essential, had been taken up by our ministers, there would be today a far different state of things in our churches. And Ellen White, friends, she just dropped the mic, okay? That's a mic drop moment right there. There is no mincing of words. There is no confusion here. It's incredibly clear. And what she is saying in her time in 1888, in her moment then, she is saying that Adventists need to be the leading the opposition against Christian nationalism. That has not changed. If we are not doing that as a united body of people, we are failing to live according to what God has called us to do as a people. Okay? So I'm not going to mince my words. I am not going to sugarcoat it. We must stop Christian nationalism. Okay? God has called us to do that, and that must be a huge part of what we do because it is core to our beliefs and identity as a people. Okay? That's it. Let's talk about it.
Thank you, Kevin. That's spectacular, unnerving, challenging presentation. What in your opinion and after your research, what is the goal of Christian nationalism? Because I'm a little concerned that we may have similar goals and find it difficult not to become nationalist Christians in defending liberty. What do you think?
Sure. I think the Christian nationalists are trying to make America into a nation that is upholding Protestant Christianity in some general sense. And they want that to be a critical part of what the nation is. But is who are good historians, at least, who've done their work and who are experts in this field, are going to tell you America was not created as a Christian nation. It was intentional separation of church and state. This is not a nation that was intended to be only for Protestant people. It was a nation that was meant to be inclusive, and that has been a clear thing going forward. Now, what this means, and this is where it's hard for Adventists, we need to be okay with people disagreeing with us and doing things that we may think are immoral.
Okay.
We have to acknowledge that. Okay. So there are things that other people want to do that we may think are immoral. Okay. For example, you may take, I don't know where you stand on something like LGBTQ, but there are a lot of people who think that's immoral. Okay. I am not going to weigh in on that conversation. I think that we need to love everybody, right? But there's a lot of people who may take that kind of a perspective. But according to Adventist understandings of separation of church and state, our own tradition and our understanding of scripture, that must be allowed simply because God created all of us free to do whatever we want. Okay. Now, the government should be governed by basic rules that protect the sanctity of life. Okay. And that gets really tricky. And we need to do better at talking about issues like abortion. And we would do a lot better if we could stop pointing fingers. It's very complicated. People on the left are not trying, they're not baby killers. People on the right are not necessarily they don't, it's not that they don't care about women. It's just that it's a complicated issue. And I think we need to talk about these things rationally, right? Rather than trying to point fingers. And we may never come to a perfect solution, but I think what both sides are wanting to do genuinely is reduce the number of abortions. I think that's true. Okay. We'll never be able to get rid of all of them. You can't unless you let women die, right? So I mean it's a challenge. So but no matter what, our beliefs cannot be imposed upon other people. That is a direct violation of religious liberty. And that is a dangerous view because where do you draw the line then? Whoever is in power then, they're the ones that dictate things for everybody else. And that you can't have a government that way. At least not one that is going to welcome everybody, right? So
Good.
anyways,
That's a distinction that's
there's a
really
lot more that could be
imperative.
said, but
Yeah.
yeah,
Good. Thank you.
sure.
Lauren, you're up. I muted you. Let's see if we can change that.
I can fix it. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks.
This is just a tremendous presentation. I'm so it's challenging me in a lot of ways. And here's I'll just tell you the thing that hit me the hardest is the breadth of their address of religious issues and even national issues, political issues. In
Yep.
order to protect religion from the state. But the imperialism part, I mean, what you said a while ago, you said they, most of us, I have gone through my life thinking that all Seventh Adventists cared about was the Sunday law.
Yep.
That's all they ever talked about. That's all anybody ever talked about. Ellen White in The Great Controversy really focuses in on the Sunday law. That's the problem.
Mhm.
And so that continues today. And so you can see how it confuses any sense of nuance that Adventists might have when this man who they regard as a martyr says, okay, yeah, but I hated a lot of people, but I always kept the Sabbath.
Yeah.
Because that was always the focus. For my entire life, I had no idea when you started putting up those cartoons and pictures about imperialism and Western expansion and progress and I mean I'd heard all those things about the Western expansion, the light on the hill, and the continually advancing uh, frontier, but I had no idea that Adventists had deeply been impressed by this. So this is amazing, and it really focuses a lot of things for me. Thank you.
You're
Oh,
welcome.
before I go away, uh, I meant to start out with this before I gave my speech, and that is next week we have David Neal from the Trans-European Division, and he's going to be talking about the search for a church identity, and he's going to be looking at it through the lens of John R.W. Stott, which had a big impression on him. Okay, I'm sorry, Kevin. Go ahead and address that.
No,
I'm
yeah,
just
sure. Yeah, Lauren, I would suggest too that you get Jeffrey Rosario on here because he'll take this to an even deeper level for you. His dissertation was on this topic, and his forthcoming book is as well. But the point about Adventists and their focus on Sunday laws, this is my take on it right now. We might be able to fine tune this as we keep studying it, but Adventists did focus a lot on the Sunday law in the 19th century and early 20th century. One of the reasons I think they did so is because they recognized that as a rallying cry for Adventists. You can get the sense from Ellen White's quote that I ended with that not all Adventists were doing what she thought they should, right? Okay, so there was no perfection, and she wanted an even greater united force than there was back then, even though I think what they were doing back then is possibly more significant than what we're doing now. Okay, so but they're using this idea because they know that Adventists can personally identify with the Sabbath, and so I think that's why they are using that as a rallying call, even though they never limited their perspective to just focusing on that issue. But then I think that as time progresses, Adventists stop realizing how significant everything else is. And they just, all they can remember is that thing that had been emphasized so much, which was the Sunday law. So I think it sort of develops in that kind of a way, which is why you and me and others, I'm sure maybe most of us here had this idea that all Adventists cared about was a national Sunday law.
That's right.
Yeah, Jeffrey
And
Rosario.
I've even had people say to me, what's the problem with these Christian nationalists? They're not, they even gave us a cutout for the Sunday
Yeah,
law.
yeah, right.
Great. Good
Yep, yep,
points.
yep, yep. Good. Well, thank you for that comment there.
Yeah. Brian Strayer, what do you think?
Well, I'll tell you, Kevin already knows this, but I think within the next month, Oak and Acorn is going to publish my scholarly biography of Joseph Wagner, who was the father of the Elliot J. Wagner of 1888 fame. Joseph Wagner in the 1870s and early 1880s was the editor of the Signs of the Times as well as of the American Sentinel, and he fought vigorously against the National Reform Association
Oh,
and against the Religious Amendment Society, and used some very colorful language. He did not mince words, not at all. And I was privileged to be able to quote him in several chapters in my book, which, as I say, I hope Oak and Acorn will have that out next month. And those of you who are interested in the topic that Kevin has just discussed, I think we'll find Joseph Wagner is one of our early Adventist pioneer heroes when it comes to opposition to mixing church and state issues. I just thought I'd mention that briefly.
yeah. Thank you, Brian. I'm really looking forward to that. And if we had a biography of Walcott Hackley Littlejohn, maybe most of you haven't heard of him, but he is one of our earliest, folks working very closely with Wagner as well and combating Christian nationalism, the version of it in his day. So yeah. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. There are many others too. Hey, Gerald, you're muted. Maybe you're trying to call Chris.
I got unmuted.
Okay, I guess go ahead. I think Gerald is wanting you to go ahead.
Great. Thank you for the presentation today. I had just told my wife I was going to lay my computer aside and not raise my hand today, but that, I guess, didn't happen.
You're
I
welcome.
love the political cartoons. I often visit the Politico cartoon carousel here in the U.S. to see what the current take is on those images, and I find them a very powerful thing, and it was nice to see that review. So thank you especially for that.
Sure.
I mentioned in the chat the U.S. flags in our churches. As a pastor for all these years, I can remember every one of my church had a U.S. flag on the platform and a Christian flag on the platform in the appropriate positions for flag etiquette. And as Christian nationalism has gotten going more here the last 10, 15 years, I have really begun to question that, but I don't know how to ask my local pastor to ask the board to remove that flag. And I know there's plenty of Christian nationalists in every church, and particularly my local one as well. I haven't gone to church much lately to have the political capital to make that request. We as a church have lobbied the court and the legislature for many years for our own exemptions.
Mm-hmm.
We don't care if anybody else has any exemptions, but we've lobbied for our own exemptions. As long as the Sunday law they're planning doesn't affect us, we'll be okay. But then we still turn around and expect another Sunday law that will really make it difficult. But at least we got this one put off. So as long as the anti-discrimination bill allows us to discriminate against LGBT people because we're a church and we should have the right to do that. That's what we really want. Those are just comments. I guess I don't really have a formulated question other than what can the average citizen Adventist do at this point, even in our church, to make a difference and have a voice? Because it's easy to get canceled. Think of all the people who were fired since September 10 from their jobs, just average lay people with a social media post. So and I'll let you answer that question, but my comment is because I'm a member of the LGBT ally and an LGBT parent of a child. I want to tell the church, we have lots of LGBT people who keep the Sabbath.
Oh, yeah.
So if Charlie Kirk's Sabbath keeping gives him a pass into righteousness, maybe our LGBT people who love the Sabbath. I know Kinship has a Sabbath program every year at camp meeting and in their program. So maybe that's an angle we could start to work. I said sarcastically and half sincerely, though. I saw Terry Duder applauding me, so thank you for that, Jerry. Anyway, I'm recovering from a COVID vaccine on Thursday, so my mind is not working properly. I'll mute myself and thank you for your presentation today.
Yeah, sure. I thought it was sufficiently clear, your comments and everything, and thank you for that. Yeah, there's a lot there, and I'll try to remember everything to respond to it all, Chris. So first of all, yeah, Adventists were opposed to putting American flags into churches initially. Most evangelical churches in America started doing that around World War I, but the Adventist church didn't start doing that until the wake of World War II, and you start to see it happening with increasing regularity between World War II and the Vietnam War. In addition to that, I have found that Adventists oppose the Christian flag in general, which we have in our churches now. That came out in 1896, and Adventists opposed that because they viewed it as a symbol of Christian nationalism, which it is. And so I find that to be very fascinating. I am personally opposed to both of those flags being in our churches. And of course, Pathfinders carrying them proudly down the aisle on Pathfinder Sabbath. I think it's a huge violation of what we stand for, at least what we initially stood for as a denomination. When it comes to LGBTQ, totally get it. I think our church has done a horrible job on this topic. We have not treated people as human beings. We have not treated them as created in the image of God, which they are. And I'm with you in acknowledging the horribleness of how we have too often treated people who happen to be LGBTQ, right? Let's see, what else did you there was something else that I was going to talk about, but what do we do today, right? What do we do today? First of all, I think I would disagree with you some on what we do in religious liberty today. I've gotten to know our folks in the religious liberty departments. They're called PARL, by the way, Public Affairs and Religious Liberty, because they do both. And I've gotten to know them better over the last few years. I've spoken at places where they're there, people like Bettina Krause, people that are either in charge of the GC office or the NAD office or one of our conference or union offices. And what I see them doing is standing for the right. I see them combating Christian nationalism. I see them fighting for religious liberty and the rights of people who are not just Seventh-day Adventists, and they're very explicit about that. Now, do they do everything that I personally think they should? Probably not, right? And I think that they could do more to combat certain issues that we see in the church today, but they have gone to bat even at great risks. For example, what happened not too long ago in Russia and going to bat for the Jehovah's Witnesses, right? And we were the only, from what I recall, if I'm correct, we were the only religious organization in Russia that stood and fought for Jehovah's Witnesses religious liberty. Okay. And it was very dangerous because it highlighted Adventists, which is a minority group in Russia, a lot. And there was deep concern about how that would impact the Adventists in Russia, right? So I think that they do more than we give them credit for. Perhaps, and maybe some of that is because we're not aware of what they're doing. And so what can we do? I think one of the things we can do as Adventists is to engage ourselves more in what PARL is doing. They need more foot soldiers. They need more of us on the ground that are going to do things like rallying people and for local elections, right? That are going to in circulating petitions that are going to be opposing bills that are going to violate the rights of people. They need us on the ground to do this. I mean, in the 19th century, Adventists were outstripping just about everyone when it came to petitioning against Christian nationalism. I think that Jeffrey Rosario is going to show us that we were doing more than anyone else in the entire country, right? And so we were incredibly active, even though we were even smaller than we are today. And so we have a lot to do on that front. But why not tap into the resources we have, which is a PARL department that goes all the way up to the GC level? They may not do things 100% the way that we personally would do, but there is so much common ground that if we united forces, we could get a lot done. And we're supposed to have that happening in every local church. Okay. And so this is a great way to do it. I think that I'm very much supportive of other entities. I'm a very strong supporter of the American Civil Liberties Union. So I signed petitions. In fact, I signed a wave of them this morning. I view it as an important thing to do on the Sabbath specifically because I think it's lawful and important to do good on the Sabbath. I also really support the NAACP. And so I think that there are entities out there like that that are worthy of our time and attention. And I don't do a whole lot with them other than simply signing petitions. It's a small thing, but I think it matters. And so that's good. But they organize things locally, and we can get involved in that. I've got two young kids at home, and I'm traveling a ton, so it's hard for me to get out and actually like march or protest in that kind of way. I've never really been able to do that, but in theory, we can do that kind of stuff, and I think it does help. But one of the best things we can do as an Adventist community is work with our PARL friends, I think. And if you don't know much about what they're doing now, familiarize yourself with it. I think you'll be impressed and maybe even surprised. Okay.
Good. Good reply. Good conversation there, boys. Alex Prouty, what's on your mind?
Well, as I was observing the cartoons and the illustrations and the activism, it looked like that was almost exclusively 19th century, maybe some early 20th century. And I have my guesses, but I was
Sure.
curious if you might speak. Do we have evidence of that post World War One?
Yeah.
And what caused that shift there? I wonder if you could speak to that just a little bit.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much. Yeah, so the images that I was giving you were from primarily the 1890s, 1900s, 1910s, and 1920s. So some of those go beyond World War II. And I do think that the church shifts a lot post World War I. The presentation I did in this group or it's probably been a couple years maybe, but I talked about how the Bureau of Investigation, which was the FBI, but they added the word federal to their name in the 1930s. They were heavily surveilling the church during World War I, and they demanded that we censor for various reasons because they didn't like what we were publishing. And a lot of that included our take on religious liberty and our take on American prophecy and these kinds of things. And so there was a strong push beginning with that period, and the Adventists, they were forced, with potential like 20 years in federal prison because they came after the Adventist leaders literally 3 days right after they had just locked up the leaders of the Jehovah's Witnesses. And so it was a serious threat. And that plays a pretty big role in shaping and reshaping Adventists' views of the American state. And you see that especially in the military, right? In our approach to the military. And I do talk about this in my Oxford Handbook chapter on the military, if you wanted to read what I've written there and how this has shifted and so forth, where we go from like being what I call reluctant non-combatants, where you will only participate in the military if you are drafted, to where you get to people like Desmond Doss who actually volunteer now he's not volunteering pure on, but he's voluntarily disregarding his draft exemption. Okay, so he wants to serve. And so we get to the point where American Adventists are wanting to serve the military. So there's no longer a reluctant non-combatancy. It's as Doss calls it, it's conscientious cooperation, right? And it's in between these war years, and as you move through World War II and you get heroes like Doss, that you have a real new union between America and the Adventist Church, which is fully represented in Operation Whitecoat. If you're not familiar with Operation Whitecoat, this is where the U.S. military, the Army specifically, joins literal forces with the General Conference of Seventh-day Adventists on what is called Project Whitecoat, where they say, we know you want your Sabbaths off. We know you don't want to bear arms. We are starting this new, research project on germ warfare, and we need to do testing on human subjects. And they say, okay, you Adventists, you be the human subjects, and we'll give you informed consent, haha, whatever that means. And then, we'll try to develop all these kinds of things to combat, whatever Russia or China is going to throw at us or whatever. So they do that, and there's I don't remember how many whitecoats there are, but it's more than 1,000. It might even be as many as 3. I can't remember. It's in there. It's a number of people. And there's a lot of good that comes out of that. We get, vaccines for like the plague and I think it's hepatitis A and B and various things that are significant that advanced the world, really. And yet Adventists were human test subjects, and you can't really have informed consent if you've never given someone this sort of disease before. You don't really know what it's going to do to their body. So it's kind of a joke. But the point that I'm making here is that this represents a new sort of union where by the 1950s, you really have the Adventist Church that is fully supportive in every sense of the American state. And this, of course, is an extremely conservative period in American history during the Eisenhower administration. This is where you get, in God we trust, on all of the money in the nation. This is where you have one nation under God put into the Pledge of Allegiance. And all of our kids are going to start saying that, including many of you will start saying that in schools, right? And so this is a major moment where Christian nationalism is gaining a lot of victories too. And Adventists start turning their heads a lot, I think, especially post-World War II. And even though we've never fully dropped the ball in these issues, I do think that we have had a conservative turn. It's pretty evident. I hope that answers your question sufficiently.
Yes, thank you. Appreciate your continued work.
Yeah, thanks.
Good angle. Pursuing that, I think, is really logical. Thanks. George.
Yes. Sorry.
You just muted yourself again.
Sorry, it is my vision.
There you go. We're good.
My vision. Thank you so much for your most needed and invaluable presentation. This issue is very important, and just a couple of things quickly here. A couple of days, there was a ceremony somewhere in England when they unsealed a envelope that had been sealed since 1935 and 39. And inside was what was supposed to be the last words of a beloved Czech president of Czechoslovakia, Tomáš Masaryk. And supposedly those were his last words. But he died in 1935, and he wrote that in 1934. So were not his last words. But in that document, they found out, and that was 2 days ago, basically, there's the following saying, among others. When people are uneducated and foolish, there's no hope for them, because they usually enjoy that condition. It struck me very, very strongly because, I am Czech I'm basically Czech. And those words, knowing the history of Czechoslovakia and everything in the past century, that was a major statement. When people are uneducated and foolish, there is no hope for them because they usually enjoy this condition. And I think about our situation in our days. When I see Adventists, I still cannot understand or believe that Adventists are supporting many Adventists, or most of them, or many of them, supporting what is going on in this country here.
Yep.
And so it's unbelievable. And just one more thought: before the elections, I was struck when a person that was at that time a good friend of mine said, "I am going to vote for whoever keeps more money in my pocket."
Yeah.
And this was an Adventist.
Yeah.
And that was a serious person,
Yeah.
a well-educated person.
Mm-hmm.
And I could not believe he's saying that. And we never talked again since, because, this is materialism at works. And so how come the religion can do nothing for people like that? This is pure hypocrisy. So I really thank you for your approach, for your work on exposing these things. And if it doesn't click after your explanation, after your presentation, is because those people are really uneducated in something and foolish, and they are really enjoying that. There's no hope for them. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for your comment, George. I mean, something that I think that we need to try to do, and it's hard for us on whatever side of the spectrum or whatever side of this conversation we're on, is we need to be willing to dialogue and talk with people. We need to be open for conversation. And it is frustrating because there are so many people that they just don't want to hear the facts. They don't want to hear the truth. They just want to keep their own perspective and they don't want to learn. And that is very difficult. And sometimes it's frankly impossible, to have a conversation with them. But despite the challenges, despite the great challenge there, I think we need to try. I think the only way that we can survive and thrive as a society is if we are flexible, if we are willing to listen, and if we're willing to grow together. So thank you for your comment.
Thank you so much. Just one comment. You see, you are younger and you are probably in a position of doing this. I myself, I cannot have those conversations.
Right.
My family escaped fascism once and communism after that. And I don't know how it works. I know where we are going in this country here. And I just have no time to discuss these issues with people who are totally foolish and uneducated about this. But keep working, keep preaching, keep telling people and talking to them. You are doing a great job. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you, George.
Thanks, George, for the words of admonition and encouragement. Kevin James, you've got a head on your shoulders. Share with us, please.
Yeah, well, thank you. I'm sorry I don't have my video on, but my dog there has better hair than I do at this moment. So I thought I'd go ahead and put him on instead of me. And by the way, I had to put him down on July 3rd, so he's gone now. But anyway, I'm a PARL minister. I work in PARL. I'm the associate director for Public Affairs and Religious Liberty at the Southern Union. And so I concur that we don't do everything positive, right all the time, but we do strive to do that. I think one of the reasons that our PARL is so weak today has to do with the fact that we took the narrative that all that was important was Sunday laws. A friend of mine and I have been fighting that for a long time, saying that that's not what it's about. That even when we were supposedly fighting them, we were actually fighting Christian nationalism in a broader sense of the amendments that they tried to make in the Constitution to make America legally Christian. So that's what we worked on very heavily. And it's been kind of, even in the work and my colleagues, I was I was in a meeting not long ago and discussing things that we could possibly be saying out there. I think we're still a little too resident in doing it. We're afraid of getting, I guess, persecuted to some degree. But one of the things I was concerned about is we hadn't said anything about Miss Buddy's sermon in the National Cathedral right after the inauguration, if you remember that, a couple of days later.
That was a great, yeah.
She appealed to President Trump directly,
Mm-hmm.
about the dangerous path that he was actually taking and the fear that were among people. And we wouldn't say anything. And then what happened was Congress brought up Bill number 59, rebuking. They were going to actually legally rebuke Buddy for her political activism. And I said, we need to speak out on that because that's taking away the voice and the power of the church, the church that speaks truth to power.
Yep.
And nobody was willing to say anything, but they gave me something I could write. So I wrote a little article in the May-June article of Liberty, if you want to take a look at that. It's in the May-June article. At least they gave me a chance to say it there. So, but we do try and we do the best that we can. I really appreciate this message too, Kevin, because since 2009, I had put together a seminar called Subtle Snares, Adventism and the Seduction of Nationalism. Because way back in 2009, I was seeing a definite growth among Adventists imbibing in the Christian nationalist rhetoric.
Yeah.
And even in 2009, when I gave the seminar, I was getting lots of pushback, although a lot of shock too. I was using the history of our church in Germany as a template to what you kind of see is going on today. And that was way back in 2009.
That's great.
And
Yeah.
I have been struggling with this for a long time. And then when COVID came along, I couldn't believe just how clear it was that we had become politicized in our congregations, that we had lost our identity, because my whole aspect in the seminar has to do with the loss of identity. That's why the Germans did what they did with Hitler.
Yeah.
And what I mean is they lost their Christian identity.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask a question. I didn't want to make a long comment like that so much, Kevin, but you did mention I thought it was during World War I that the flag came in, but that was actually the time when they were not the FBI, but what was it called before the FBI?
Just the Bureau of Investigation.
Yeah, Bureau. It was just the BI, wasn't it?
Just the BI.
Yeah, just the BI. And
Same entity though.
They were very concerned about our rhetoric, the way we went. And I know we changed the picture of the two-horned beast, did we not? During that period into
We made
bison, I believe it was.
a cute little buffalo. Yep.
Yeah, we were toning down our rhetoric. And I think it was about that time that I can trace, and especially our focus on, Sunday laws as being the only focus. I think that's where our PARL work has kind of has gotten weak, unfortunately, and I find ourselves lacking in some backbone where we need to speak up on things, even if it's possible of receiving persecution, because people need to know where we stand as a people. But anyway, I didn't mean to take all that time, but thank you, Kevin, for this. It's been good to have somebody have your back.
Well, hey, thank you so much for those comments. And when I'm talking about the sort of shift here, I'm talking about it kind of starting with the World War I period and sort of getting completed by World War II in its wake. But so I think we're in agreement with each other. Now, about the flags in churches, though, if you have ever seen evidence of Adventists putting flags in their churches before World War II, I'd love to see it, because I've never seen any. So not even one example of it. So if you have that data, I'd love to see it. I know the evangelicals started doing it during World War I, but I haven't seen any evidence that we did until World War II. So if you have that, I'd love to see it. Maybe I'm wrong. I haven't done a full, I've not fully exhausted that. I've only looked through our periodicals, and so forth. But so if you have any evidence, I'd love to see it. Yeah. Thanks. And then one other thing I'd like to say just in response to is, friends, sometimes our PARL friends, they just knock the ball out of the park too. And it was in the summer before the election of last year that everyone in America started getting clued in and hyped up about Project 2025. But Adventists, at least 6 months before that, were calling out the dangers of Project 2025. I know Bettina Krause, I think it was January, February issue of 2024 of Liberty. She had an editorial, warning people about Project 2025. And so Adventists were well ahead of that sort of wake up call, as it were. I remember going to a conference even in the summer of that year, and my former dissertation advisor had not even heard of Project 2025. And I was a little bit surprised, and I was like, well, this was just before all the media started picking up on it. I was like, well, it's a kind of a big deal, but I was not sure how big of a deal to make out of it yet. But then it very quickly got affirmed, even in those meetings, because other people started talking about it in that meeting. So, but we had been talking about that at least 6 months before, the nation was. So I say props and kudos to our religious liberty, leaders for really, I mean, yeah, everyone's understaffed, you're right, but they're doing their best. I really think so. So thank you, Kevin, for your comment.
Good. Mark Rebelid, you had been on. I don't find you now. If you are on, could you raise your hand again? I want to hear what you had to say. It's taken a while. I apologize. But again, I'd like to hear from you. In the meantime, Eduardo, please unmute.
Yes. Thank you. Kevin, let me try to be realistic.
Mm-hmm.
I have here, I don't know if you can see it. I receive like every month Faith and Freedom Coalition newsletter.
Hmm.
And the last one, it says President Trump thanks Faith and Freedom Coalition. And then he said, your dedication to defend faith and freedom in America achieved something remarkable in 2024. Like 40 years ago, I registered myself to receive the Catholic Register. And I receive every day the newsletter of the Catholic News Agency. So let me tell you, there are an enormous system with Catholics and Protestants. Incredible. President Trump said, your commitment to preserve biblical values empower an unprecedented deployment of grassroots activists. 12,500 volunteers go to millions and millions of homes. So the point is that we're not going to do any better than they. I just wanted to let you know that we need the power of the Holy Spirit to do something to stop this madness. And probably we're not going to be able to do it. We're not going to be able to stop it as A.T. Jones did in 1888. So I think that checking the facts, we are the little David against the great Goliath. And in these times, I think we're not going to make it. Just prepare ourselves to meet the crisis. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Eduardo.
Thank you for sharing your comments there, Eduardo. I have a different perspective. I am more optimistic than you are. If you think that we were not David against Goliath in the 1880s, then I encourage you to look at that a little bit more, because we were a tiny little bug to be squashed in America. At least in terms of numbers, we do have a larger church, and we do have a bigger voice, especially if we rallied the globe, as it were. Will we succeed? Will we fail? That's up to God. I think that's up to God. Do we need the Holy Spirit? Absolutely. but let's not let that be our modus operandi to just say we're waiting for the Holy Spirit to act. I think that God wants us to take initiative, and so forth. And we need to be, as Ellen White says in that quote from 1888, we need to be on the forefront of this. And we can be louder and bigger and stronger than our numbers. We have in the past, we can do it again. There is nothing stopping us except ourselves. And the Holy Spirit is behind it. And so he will bless the efforts if we move forward. We need to move forward in faith, though. We need to rely on his strength and his power, all of that. But we cannot be defeatist. We cannot let that we cannot be discouraged. We have to press forward. And it's our calling, and it is our duty, I believe, as Christians, Adventists, to stand and actually show people who Christ really was. Because I'll be honest with you, I think Christian nationalism is anti-Christ. It is literally putting forward things in the name of Christ that are diametrically opposed to Christ in every way. And we've got it all there. We've got the religious liberty issues. We've got the racism. We've got the sexism. We've got the homophobia. We've got it all, friends. It's all wrapped up in a neat little package, and it is so clear. And we need to stand up and show people who Jesus was, what he stood for. This is literally the core of everything we should be about. There is no other option, right? It's all in there. So maybe you feel like you've got to attack one little slice of Christian nationalism, go for it, but attack it. This beast must be brought down. And we've got to do it through the tools of Christ's kingdom. And so unlike Christian nationalists who want to be violent, we are not violent. We are peacemakers. But that doesn't mean we sit over and on the side and we, let people run over us. No,
I'm seeing assent for your words, Kevin. Perfect.
Yeah. So
Thank you.
Linda, what do you think? Can this be saved?
Well, I'm sort of questioning things perhaps from a little bit different angle. And forgive me if I, in attempting to ask my question, overgeneralize things a little bit. I'm a lay person, and so I certainly lack the intricate understanding of the workings and machinations of the church institution. But after what happened in 2015 at the General Conference, I was really disappointed and just could not wait for someone other than Ted Wilson to be elected president of our church. Or actually not our church, of the General Conference. Let me say it. I know that much.
Yeah.
Somehow I had, I suppose, been of the mistaken belief that he, on a continuum of conservatism and progressivism, or that he was just about as far as you could go on the conservative side. And my hope, I think, along with a lot of people here, was that if somebody new came in, that we might see things move just a little bit more toward a progressive viewpoint. But since then, I believe that I've come to understand that Ted Wilson was not on the far right of that continuum, that there are other entities in the church, ASI, for example, or at least some of its members, other wealthy Adventist entities that are even way further right than Ted Wilson was. And in fact, in his defense, he may have been struggling with a balancing act between the progressives and the people who were further right than he was. That's if any of that has any semblance of reality associated with it, then my question to you is, when you have Adventist luminaries like Mark Finley, Doug Batchelor, Danny Shelton, coming out and saying fond remembrances about Charlie Kirk and throwing the holy water on him, my question is, are many of us here far more deluded than we thought we were, and that maybe what we should anticipate is a bigger shift to the right as opposed to any kind of progressive breakthrough? What's the effect of those kinds of Adventist well-known individuals? What is the effect on the laity at large, do you think? What will it be? Is it a 1-minute wonder, or is there going to be a lingering effect from that?
That's a great question. I'm deeply discouraged by these leaders who are saying things like that. And I think that we need to, if they're going to say those things publicly, we need to oppose them. And so I'll say right here, I disagree. And I think Mark Finley is wrong. I think Doug Batchelor is wrong. I think they are misguiding the church on these issues. And I applaud the Central States Conference of Seventh-day Adventists. Have you seen the statement that they put out, I think 4 days ago, 4 or 5 days ago? I don't, just maybe a couple days ago, they not only go in very clearly on all these people who are affirming Charlie Kirk, they name some of them. And so they actually end by saying, our conference leadership will study the current phenomenon and reach out to the leaders of specifically Amazing Facts and 3ABN to ascertain our future official relationships with these organizations. So I say I'm applauding that because they are doing what we need to do. We're at a point where there are people who this is I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but if I can joke for a second, please understand I'm about to give a joke. We have not had Jesuit infiltrators, but perhaps we've had Christian nationalist infiltrators, right? So and
Yes.
so we need to be able and willing and confident to stand strongly against them. And it does make it challenging because I think, to be fair to these people, they have done some good things, and I will find some agreement somewhere at some level with them. I find a lot of non-agreement, okay? A lot of non-agreement, and especially on these topics, I think there's virtually none. And so they need to be boldly opposed, and people need to understand that just because it's a Mark Finley or a Doug Batchelor, they're not right. They're pandering to popularity. They are excusing sin, and they are just really, really short-sighted to look at something like, oh, the Sabbath, this guy's a great guy, or he watches 3ABN, so he must be a great guy, or he watches, or he reads Amazing Facts, so he's in the kingdom. How the mighty are fallen. I'm sorry, but that is not a good judge of Christian character, and we need to stand strong for what the Bible teaches, even if that means some of our other leaders get it wrong sometimes. And hopefully they'll open up and be willing to see the truth themselves. I don't know, but I applaud the States
But we
Conference.
don't see anyone. I mean, and please make no disrespect here, but who are you?
Yeah.
I mean,
Exactly. Who am I? I'm just a professor. I know.
I mean,
I'm
we don't have, I mean, our institutional church did not even speak out when a Seventh-day Adventist minister who was on a board in Ghana voted to criminalize LGBT activity.
Right.
And so, I mean, how can we really, I'm sort of, who was it? I'm sort of with the guy who was disappointed. I'm not sure that there's much we can do. Ed Reifsnyder wonders if this is the shaking. Well, maybe it is, but not the way
you broke up a little bit there. Maybe it's my internet connection. I'm not sure. My internet dropped a little bit, so I couldn't hear the last part of what you're saying. I don't know if you
I'm
guys can hear me.
sorry. I'm sorry.
No,
I just
it's not
said-
you. It's my internet. Sorry about that.
I apologize myself. I just, Ed Reifsnyder says maybe this is the shaking, but not exactly in the way we had thought it might be.
We'll see. We'll find out.
Well, it would certainly feel good to some of us if someone who was more well known than you or I by the laity at large came out and spoke about this. I don't know if there's any hope of that or not.
I don't know either. I am though very positively affected and happy for the Central States Conference. And there's another statement, really bold statement from the Seventh-day Adventist Office for Regional Conference Ministry. Excellent statement from them as well. So we do, friends, we do have allies. We do have people who are speaking the truth in this moment. And we need to see that. We need to honor that. It's not everybody. We're divided. We are simply divided as a people. We need to acknowledge that. And we need to very kindly, and as Christians, try to stand for the truth. I'm not here to tear anybody down. But I will, if someone like a Mark Finley or Doug Batchelor is going to publicly say what they say, then I have the right to publicly say that they're wrong if I believe they're wrong. And so I'll do that. And I don't mean any disrespect in a broad sense to them, but I don't respect them on this point. I think that they are misleading and misguiding the church in this moment, and that's not good. And we need more people that are going to stand bold and stand strong. I think we do. But yeah, Linda, I'm
Well,
a
thank
nobody.
you.
I really am.
Thank you for bringing that up, Linda. And I would note that on the chat, it's noted that AT has posted these statements. So look on the website, you'll find it. Sherry Ann, where is it in the islands that we have this kind of conflict?
Hi, Jerry, and thank you so much, Kevin, for your presentation. I've been making quite a lot of notes trying to figure out what exactly I want to ask or share. So I have several thoughts. I'll start there and then see where we end. So I grew up in Jamaica. I'm currently living in Barbados, and I'm used to a lot more patriotism rather than nationalism. Though I know some of my other Caribbean colleagues will say Jamaicans are pretty nationalist. We think ourselves better than everybody else in the Caribbean, but it really is about, patriotism, and seeing that sit beside or Christianity is kind of how I grew up. And so you will, just to paint the picture for you in terms of what that looks like, we are very big in track and field. And you'll have in Sunday churches where if there is a significant race being run on a Sunday, like a World Championships or the Olympics, they will actually live stream that, pause the service, live stream the race, go back, thank God for the gold, that sort of a thing. Now, Adventists are not going to do that because, we're not supposed to be paying attention to sports on the Sabbath. But during the first week of August, when we're celebrating emancipation and independence, we will wear our black, green, and gold colors to church. So that is kind of what we're used to. And in Jamaica in particular, most persons identify as Adventists than any other single denomination or religion. And so we have significant political representation on both sides of the political aisle. Currently, our Governor General, who would be our head of state, is Adventist. He used to be president of West Indies Union. And our prime minister, he's still on the books as a member of the church. Not everybody claims him as much as they claim the Governor General. But in terms of the kind of a Christian patriotism, nationalism, one of the early tests that our Governor General had was when they wanted to pass a law on gambling and casinos. And as the head of state, he was expected to sign that. And that was, a lot of people were paying attention, like, how is he going to do that? Because it's seen as something economically benefiting for the country. But then we all know he's a prominent Adventist. He actually took vacation during that time. So he didn't actually, he wasn't the one who signed it. But there are a lot of people who pay attention to things like that. Now, coming to our current situation and what we're seeing in the US, because of the prominence of the US in the teachings of our church and prophecy, then Jamaicans and people in the Caribbean are very invested in what happens in the United States. And so the sad reality is that I see persons here espousing the same things as Mark Finley and Doug Batchelor just because of the allegiance or the similarity in beliefs, in the same way that we would have seen with Hitler and vegetarianism and not drinking alcohol. And so that worries and saddens me because what I'm seeing is a lot less of preaching and teaching about living healthy, holy lives, respecting others, sharing so much of the good things that make us Adventists, and a lot more of we then need everybody to conform, and anybody who conforms in any way at all, we embrace them. So I'm seeing a lot more of that coming in rather than the I'm proud to be Jamaican and I'm a Christian, and a lot more of because I'm a Christian, then maybe I need to get everybody else in line. So just sharing those thoughts.
Yeah, thank you so much for those thoughts. Only one comment comes into my mind, at least initially, and it's more of a clarification. It's not necessarily a direct response to you, Sherry Ann, but something that should be clarified in case people don't know is that you can be a Christian politician. You can be an Adventist politician. That is acceptable, and you can do that without being a Christian nationalist, right? So Christian nationalism is not simply holding an office. It's about trying to bend an entire nation to the wills of your own version of religion. And so I can't speak to Jamaica so much. I do know that Adventists hold a lot of positions of power in Jamaica. And I think that can be perfectly fine. I don't know if it's working out well or not. But it can go just fine as long as the Christian politicians and people in office are doing what's best for all the people, including those who disagree with them or hold different views and perspectives. Within, of course, reason, with regard to the sanctity of life, etc. Right? So, yeah, that's the only kind of thing I can say. But thank you for your comment. Yeah.
George Tichy, you've got more to say. This is a stimulating conversation indeed.
Oh, I get excited about it. You know that. You mentioned a couple of times the NRA. Now, I'm curious about your thoughts about the NAR that I learned from reading a book that you probably are familiar with, The Violence Taken by Force. I recommend this book to anyone who wants to understand these issues better. The Violence Taken by Force, where we learn about the NAR, which is the New Apostolic Reformation, a group that has been deeply involved in this process of promoting the national evangelical ideas, nationalism. What can you say something about the NAR if you are really well familiar with it?
Yeah, thank you for that. No, I am familiar with the book. I have not read it myself yet. And so I do know, and I have heard people talk about, and I've read little bits about the New Apostolic Reformation. I know in general the significance of them, but I haven't read the book. It has been recommended to me, and I feel confident from those who've recommended it to me that I would recommend it to you as well, even though I can't speak personally as having read it yet. So, but it is an important work. And so I think it deserves our attention. But yeah, it appears from the evidence that the New Apostolic Reformation has had a tremendous amount of power for quite a while in bringing in Christian nationalism to its current sort of status within America. So, George, that's about the best I can do, I'm afraid. But I'll just simply echo your recommendation of the book.
Thank you.
Thank you, George. Courtney, you've got an active set of attitudes going today. Share some of them with us, and let's see where we can take this.
Oh, well, you know what? I have a lot of things to say because
Cool.
one of the things that has been put in the chat was, the poem, until I'm sorry, I forget the name, and then they came for me, right? And so I'm very happy to see at least a portion of our church figuring out that Christian nationalism is a threat. And one of the comments that I made was that at the very beginning of the poem, not the trade unionists, but the communists were the ones who were the first to get targeted, and nobody came for them. And I feel like Black people have been in that position for centuries, and we have been talking about this very loudly, very vocally, and there has been a silence, a very deafening silence from not only the white church at large, but in particularly the Adventist church. Historically, like Kevin was saying, there have been abolitionist movements within our church, and our church has been involved in social justice, and our church has talked about these issues, but somewhere along the line, we have fallen to these ideas where they have just fallen right in line with embracing people like Charlie Kirk and like all of these other individuals who have this very strong bent towards not just Christian nationalism, but very specifically white Christian nationalism and patriarchy. And we have embraced that and haven't rooted it out. I wrote an article several months ago, very contemporary with Benita's article about Project 2025, and also several articles about Charlie Kirk before this, because he had been invited into our churches with this Wisdom PARL organization. And I think I spoke here on this forum. Lauren invited me to talk a little bit about it a few months ago as well. And this idea that we have been slowly infiltrated, that, I know, Kevin, you said that it was a joke about being infiltrated by Christian nationalists instead of Jesuits, but I I don't think it's
They're
a
there.
joke. I don't
They're
think it's
there.
a
No, they're
joke.
there. We have them.
And at this point, it has become, the last article that I wrote happened to be published just a few days before Charlie Kirk was shot. And now it's all of a sudden like, oh my goodness, who have we been harboring in our midst this entire time? And I I know that there are some who have expressed pessimism about where we are now. And I have to say that I sort of concur with it, because I truly believe that it's such a deep seated issue that has gone on for a very long time, and that our church has been not just reluctant, but outright refusing to recognize is an issue. And it begins with racism, and it adds things like patriarchy, like white supremacy, like Christian, Christian persecution of other religions. It adds all of these things on top of it, and it compounds it into what Christian nationalism is today. And until we begin to really look and see how specifically white patriarchal Christian nationalism has taken root in our church, we're not going to deal with this issue, not with, just talking about it and pointing it out, but actually really acknowledging it as a deep-seated problem in our denomination. So that was a lot.
That is so well
Sorry.
said, though. Yeah, so well said. Agree with you 100%. Like, I have some optimism, but that does not mean I think that we are where we need to be at all. I think we are far behind where we should be on this issue. But I have hope that that at least enough of us can stand strong. I have no idea what the new GC leadership is going to be like on these issues. It could be challenging simply because our new General Conference president is not American, to sort of
Yeah.
weigh in from a position of power. It may be difficult for that kind of thing, because he comes from a part of the world that our current president in the United States finds deplorable and hates, right? So this could be a really big challenge for us on that score. Yet I do know, and I just simply am trying to affirm that we do have people that are speaking truth right now. Not enough. It's not coming from enough of our leadership, but it is happening, and I simply am trying to affirm and applaud those who are
Oh,
doing it. Yeah,
absolutely, absolutely. And
yeah,
just in case anybody real notes, in our leadership, those two letters that you've talked about,
yeah.
for our international listeners who are here, they might not be aware of the composition of those
Hmm.
conferences. So the people who have put out these statements, Central State Conference, Kristen Josiah is the president of that conference, and the conference or Office of Regional Ministries, and Buddy Bird is the director for that, and
Yes.
or sorry, the chairperson for that, and also the president of of Southwest Region. Those are what we call regional conferences. I know that you know this. I'm saying this for those who are not in America. And regional conferences have historically been are historically Black conferences. And so the people who are speaking out now forcefully have been Black conference leadership. And I would love to see, I mean, again, like Linda said, I'm glad to see you and other people who are not Black who are talking about it. But I would love to see some non-Black conference officials also talking about this, and people who are in positions of administrative authority who are talking about this as well, because the only people on that level that I have seen have a forceful voice about this have been Black people. And
Yep.
so I don't know, maybe put in some calls.
Yeah, right. No, hey, again, thank you so much for that, because you're dead on. And let's just, I'll say it as a white man. People like me, white men, are primarily the ones that are failing here, and we have to stop.
Yeah.
It's got to stop. And you're dead right. We need to have other conferences that are not predominantly Black or not in a regional, sense or whatever. They need to weigh in. They need to step up, because they are massively failing here in this moment. And so, yeah, I fully, agree with everything you said there. And I
Thank you.
too wish that there were more people that look more like me that would speak up. It needs to happen. You're right.
Yeah. Thank you for adding that conversation and encouraging all of us, Courtney. Thank you. Clarence Pamphili, you've been patiently waiting, got off the list, but you're on now.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. I would say to Kevin that I must confess to having confused thoughts on all of these issues, really. And I'm not just talking about his presentation. I mean, generally, as I look at Adventism and the church as a whole, I find that there are so many things that are just not correct, Some years ago, I remember reading an article or hearing a presentation by one Jerry Falwell about Washington for Jesus. And the editor of the Adventist Review roundly criticized him. So I asked myself, if we as Adventists desire and need to make a contribution to have some influence somewhere for a change in society, other than just within our church, first question, is it right to aspire to change society? Maybe it isn't. Or is it? And secondly, are we in our place, or can we achieve anything without being in the government? Without having Washington for Jesus? That's my question.
A great question. I think there's a few things here that come to my mind. First of all, Adventists should be the first to say and remember that there is a distinction between the so-called church, as we see described in Scripture, and the so-called world, right? And they're meant to be separate entities. They're not meant to be blurred and confused like Christian nationalists are trying to do, right? So they are meant to be two different entities. And because of the fact that we care about, life and social justice, at least we should as Adventists, that doesn't mean we're just sitting on the sidelines and letting political leaders do whatever they want. Absolutely not. We need to be engaged in politics, but we're not trying to bend politics to fit our understanding of Christianity to where it's negatively impacting other people, right? And so there has to be a freedom. We're not trying to make America look like the Adventist church. There's separate things. They're independent things from one another. And it would be ludicrous to try to do that, right? And so how do you do that? I think a lot of it comes down to tactics as well. So, you may urge people that drinking alcohol is bad, or you may urge people that like racism is bad. These are things that are not good for you, right? They're not good for anybody. Something like alcohol, we know from prohibition that it's not a good idea to try to just legally enforce it. But you can encourage people and show them that it's bad for their health. So you can use the tactics of moral persuasion. That is legitimate, okay? But to try to enforce it to where everyone is required to fit your understanding, that is unwise. And it's also oppressive to people. So a lot of it comes down to the tactics that we choose too. Does that help clarify in any way, Clarence, your question or your dilemma?
Well, certainly some. But I'm thinking that is fine, and that could work for a big country like the United States. What do you do when you have an island community like Pitcairn, for example? Didn't we try an experiment in government and church on that little island? Or wasn't it legitimate?
Yeah. That's a great point. It's difficult to say because I don't have a good enough knowledge of Pitcairn Island myself. But, you know, I think the real key is about force, you know, and so the principle that we base our religious liberty on is found in Genesis at the very beginning of the Bible, with this notion that there's a tree of knowledge of good and evil. You have the ability to choose what you want. You can choose evil if you want. You can choose good, and hopefully you'll choose good, right? And so, you know, creating a government that's going to force people to bend to the majority's will, you're always going to oppress minorities. That's going to be what happens. And the challenge with democracy is built upon that. Democracy is based upon majority rule. Okay. And so minorities are going to suffer in a democracy, but it's going to ostensibly appear that we have freedom for everybody. That's not how it works. It's not how it works. The only way that democracies will actually uphold the rights of minorities is if the majority will somehow side with the minority on issues, even at their own expense. But that almost never happens, to be perfectly
Good points
blunt.
all. We've got 3 participants
Thank you.
yet on the line. Lauren, we need to hear something to remind us of next week and the weeks to come, and then let's get back to these 3. We've got
Kevin, I know we're a little past where you expected to go. Can you hang on for a couple of more questions?
I'll do these 3, and then I really need to
Yeah,
go.
that's fine. Let me just say that next week we have David Neal, and now I should tell you folks, this is a new era. You know, Linda wondered what happened when we got a new president. One thing that the new president said was that he accepts Adventist Today and Spectrum as part of the church, and that means that when we asked an officer from the Trans-European Division to speak, he said, "Sure, I've got permission to do that now." And so this is a kind of a new day. We've had them before, and also had them cancel on us because their boss told them not to. This time, David Neal is going to be talking about the identity of the church and how his understanding of that identity was shaped by some writings of John R.W. Stott. So that should be really good. Kevin, I'll just say this one thing. Whenever I have talked to what everybody is asking you about here, why there aren't more people addressing this, they have said, Ellen White says we shouldn't take any stance on political issues. And since there is a party that's identified with this issue, we can't talk about it. A little weaselly, I think, but it gets them off the hook and keeps them from having to face that they may have to say something hard. Anyway, just my 2 cents there.
Yeah, sure. And just so it's clear, that's a bold-faced lie. Ellen White never said that either. She does warn about politics, but she's warning people to avoid partisan politics. She very much encourages Adventists to weigh in on political issues, as I showed from the quote I ended with today. And so, yeah, that's a lot of people make that claim, but they're just dead wrong. It's actually incorrect. So, anyhow, let's take these last 3 questions.
Ed Reifsnyder, you're up.
Good afternoon. I want to follow up on some of Courtney's comments, as well as the exchange between Kevin and Lauren just now.
Sure.
First of all, just a throwaway comment, I've been astounded at the national conversation that this event with Charlie Kirk has generated. I had no idea, to be honest, that his influence ran so deep, but that's neither here nor there. Our church has long had a very prominent theme of the separation of church and state. I mean, as far back as I can remember, that's been a kind of a drumbeat. And at various times we've been scared to death of it. Other times it's just a exegetical theory. But it's been there my whole life. And I keep wondering at the role of the official church in this national conversation. I get the feeling that right now, most of the church, except for the two conferences we've referred to, is trying to stay off the radar screen. They might be frightened to get on the radar screen because in the current administration, retribution seems to be a key feature. Should our church entities, specifically the GC, but also conferences and unions, should they speak out about this long-held prominent theme we've had? It's probably a matter of principle. And I have the feeling that our church membership is pretty split on this, and it might be viewed by the leadership as dangerous to their well-being to speak out about it in a public way. And I'm just wondering if this is actually a test of who we are and who we have long proclaimed we're going to be in this prominent issue of church-state stuff. And within AT, it's also a matter of discussion. How do we relate to it? Do we try to make all our articles very balanced so we don't offend anybody? I have a friend who's after me all the time about this issue. I don't pass it on to our team, but thinks we're against the right prominently. We don't interpret it that way at all. But what about this? Is this a test of the church's ability to speak out about long-held principles in the face of a divided membership?
Yeah, that's a great question. It could be seen that way. Perhaps it is that way. But thank you for bringing up the complexities because they go even deeper. Let me bring some other issues that are collateral damage here, or collateral issues at least, not damage as much at this point. But the Adventist Church is extremely vulnerable in a lot of ways in America. We're the most racially or ethnically international, whatever term you want to use, religion in America, at least according to Pew Research. And so we have a lot of people here in this country that are undesirable in the eyes of the current administration of America. And there are so many people who could simply be targeted if the government got angry enough at the Adventist Church and decided to sort of make us the focus of their attention. So things, for example, that you need to be aware of that we haven't discussed here is, I believe it was September 8th, the Supreme Court legalized racial profiling. That's a serious factor. And we have a lot of people that are not white. Most people in our church in America and around the world are not white, right? And so that's a big problem because it could lead to massive injustice, that one thing alone. We also saw Friday that Donald Trump has signed an executive order saying that there's now a $100,000 bill attached to anyone with an H-1B visa.
Yeah.
We have a ton of people that work in our church that are on an H-1B visa, right? And so this is an incredibly challenging thing. And if we're going to be fully honest about the complexities here, is it an issue of testing our allegiance, or is it better for some of our members to not bring too much attention, because then you could lead to the deportation of many people or separations of families or any other manners of untold injustice? So let's be honest. I've come in this presentation pretty much very blunt and against Christian nationalism, which I am. And yet, please understand, I recognize incredible complexity here. And it is not easy, and it is difficult. And I wish that we could win on all fronts and stand up for what's right, and then also be safe and not endanger people by standing up for what's right. But it doesn't work that way. And these are reasons why our leaders decided to start racially segregating our church in the South in the late 19th century. Okay. And it became an issue of life and death. And our leaders ended up, making a stand, which I lament so often, and yet I understand as a historian too, where they say whites will work for whites, blacks will work for blacks, because it got to the point where there were death threats, and both white and black members of the church were begging leadership to make it happen this way, right? But if they had stood up for what we know is right, wouldn't we be in a better place today? Well, it's hard to say. Maybe a lot of our leaders would have been killed off. And would we be where we are? How on earth can you even answer that counterfactual question? It's hard to say. And so our leadership is in a very tough situation of trying to balance all of these myriads of factors, which are serious issues. And I'm an idealist in a lot of ways, but we have to blend idealism with pragmatism at some point. And I recognize that. And so it is complicated. Are we having a true test of character moment right now? Maybe. In some sense, yes.
Observation. Good
But
observation.
It's complicated. Yeah. Sorry. Go ahead.
Ed Zerkwitz.
Hi, Kevin. Thank you for your presentation. I really didn't know too much about Charlie Kirk either, as some of the comments have mentioned, but it's created a lot of stir, all across the spectrum. But my question is slightly different. Do you have an opinion about other religions, non-Christian religions, getting involved in government to change policies based on their religions? Or is it your focus just today on Christian nationalism?
Thank you so much for that. No, I would naturally be opposed to any religious group, Christian or not, that would be trying to use the government and try to enforce religious legislation to benefit their particular group. No, for sure. I don't think we're in any danger of that happening in America in our lifetime. Christians are just too much, they have too much power, and other religious groups don't in America. But outside of America, that will be the issue. So for certain, it is an issue of religious nationalism more broadly, and that would be a problem. But that's not our issue in America today, right?
Right. Has been in other countries already. You're right. Charlie Utt, I haven't heard from you. This is your chance to have the last word. You're up.
Thank you. I appreciate very much Kevin's time and expertise that he's blessed us with this afternoon. I have an observation that will kind of drift into a question. I sense the Charlie Kirk involvement of our church, which I'm kind of shocked by how deep it's gotten already, as coming from the space between being starstruck as a denomination, as a group, being starstruck, and also being a little, having a bit of an inferiority complex. We're strange, we're that queer people. I think I've heard that phrase over the years. And I've seen that manifested time and time again, where there's some sort of church meeting, general conference in Detroit. I was there as a teenager. And in church centennials, like I was in Northern California, at a church we used to attend, where the local mayor, the city mayor, is invited to be a local functionary, and he gets a standing ovation. And I doubt whether half the audience would have even known who this person was before the meeting. What accounts for that?
Yeah.
Strange reaction to local celebrities, and why on earth does it carry through to someone like Charlie Kirk? Is it just because there's some validation being bestowed on us, we feel that this sort of strangeness because we keep Sabbath and not Sunday, so we're weird. And if somebody comes to validate us, regardless of all the baggage that's destructive that they bring along, what is that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think it could be what you said. I think that factors in. There's probably a lot of things going on here, including things more general, like the toxicity of social media in general, in a broad sense. I mean, social media is not bad in a general sense, but at the same time, I think we have all noticed that since social media has become a greater prominence in America and in the world, people are too quick to just put their thoughts out there in the public, thinking that they're, intelligent, and yet they're half-baked too often times. And so people rush out to just from their emotive state of being, they'll just put out something out there, and then of course that'll start an argument. And that I don't think that's helpful.
Is it because we're being selective? We hear the word Sabbath and suddenly
Yeah.
he's our favorite person, never mind all the other stuff.
Yeah, and then and maybe for some of these people, I don't want to give them all a pass because maybe they are making more intelligent comments or putting more thought into it, and I happen to vociferously disagree with it. But I mean, some people are probably just they hear something like that and like, a Sabbath keeper got murdered. This is horrible. And it's like, well, have you ever listened to anything this man said? Nobody should die like Charlie Kirk did. As a human being, I empathize with a human being being gunned down like that. That shouldn't happen.
Right.
But Charlie Kirk was a vile human being. He said some of the worst things you can ever say. And, and at some point, and I mean this with respect still, the Bible does tell us he who lives by the sword dies by it. And Charlie Kirk's language was vile and violent. And so that is what led to his death. It had nothing to do with the Sabbath and his Sabbath observance at all. And so people are missing that point. And people who say vile things like Charlie Kirk, they should not be murdered for that.
Sure, for sure.
They shouldn't.
Yeah.
But they shouldn't. We need to stand up against them, though, at the same time, at least non-violently, because they need to be checked. Their vileness needs to be checked, and leaders of this nation should not give them a platform, And so there's a lot that can be done that is a respectable.
Nor should Adventist churches give them a platform.
Exactly. We have had Adventist churches given them a platform, and there have been conferences where he's a featured speaker, and some other leaders. Yeah, it's disgusting. And we need to be free from that kind of vileness and not support it, And so, yeah, it's a big mess. And yet at the same time, we need to stop being blinkered. This isn't exactly, even though the nation is roiling over this issue, it's not that complicated. Right. It's actually not. What is right and what is wrong in this case is not that hard to determine. And it's okay to have tension. It's not okay to murder somebody, but it's also not okay to say the things he said. Those are both true.
Kevin, thank you so very much for your frankness.